be here. We will start this evening with a reading from 1 Corinthians in chapter 1, right at the end of page 767 if you're using the Pew Bibles. Yes, this is chapter 1, starting in verse 18. And this is a portion of the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Christians in Corinth. And just for context, that was a Roman colony at the time, located in modern-day Greece. Beginning again, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world, and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. But of him you are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, in righteousness and sanctification and redemption, that, as it is written, he who glories, let him glory in the Lord.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Our first song this evening will be As the Deer Pants. As the Deer Pants. The one that's in the book isn't the same version that's on the screen, so we'll be using the screen. Show me, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. Our song prior to the opening prayer will be number 200. 200. Do, so, mi, so. Hallelujah, praise God.
Let's pray. Our holy Heavenly Father, we approach you now in prayer, thanking you for this day that you've blessed us with, for this first day of the week that we can assemble together to worship you. Father, we acknowledge you as the all-knowing, all-powerful God, the one true, holy, and righteous God. And Father, as we assemble together, we're reminded that We are a family. We are a body united through Jesus, through his sacrifice and death. It's because of his sacrifice, because he came upon this earth, that he died, that he was raised on the third day, and that he now sits at your right hand. We can approach you in prayer with confidence, with boldness, knowing that you hear our prayers. And Father, we pray for continued unity, that we would be unified in our desire to please you, that we would make it our goal and our aim to know you, to seek you and seek your will, and to seek what you would have us to do. And Father, as a body, we are affected by each other. We're affected when one of us is struggling or hurting. That's why, Father, we pray that we will always look out for each other. We will look for ways to encourage and to build each other up so that we can all grow in our service to you, that we can all draw closer to you and have a deeper relationship with you. And Father, we pray that we will remember who we are. Father, we're Christians. We are your children. We've been adopted as heirs to an eternal promise. We are your servants. And Father, we pray that our actions, the things that we say, the things that we do would reflect our inner selves. It would reflect our desires, the things that are in our hearts and minds. And Father, we pray that our desires will not be according to our will, but will be according to your will. Father, we thank you for this church here, Father, for each and every member, for each role each of us plays in building and growing this body. Father, we're thankful for the elders who watch over this flock. We pray that you will provide wisdom and strength in the decisions that they make, and that they will always look to your word for guidance. And Father, we pray that we will give them the support that they need. Father, we pray that our hearts and minds will continue to be focused on you during this worship period, that we would glorify and honor you during this worship. And Father, we pray that we would glorify and honor you each and every day of our lives. Father, we pray for your continued blessings upon us. We pray for forgiveness when we sin and fall short. And Father, we pray that we will continue to grow and mature in our relationship with you. And Father, through your Son, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and we offer this prayer. Amen.
Amen. If you are using a hymn book and would like to mark it to number 237, His Grace Reaches Me, that'll be the song of encouragement after the lessons this evening, number 237. Prior to that, we'll sing number 583, Sing to Me of Heaven, 583, and I'll ask if it's convenient for you to please stand while we sing this song. No, so me so. Sing to me of heaven, sing that song of peace. From the toils that bind me, it will bring release. Burdens will be lifted at our pressing slow. Showers of great blessings o'er my heart will flow. Sing to me of heaven, let me find. Of its glory, of its
would open your Bibles with me to Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 3 is where we're going to start. How did you feel after this morning's sermon? What were you thinking about? What did you talk about on the ride home? My guess is there was a wide range of thoughts after our shepherd shared with us the kind of perspective we need to have toward each other, and in particular, the status of some people who are really close to our hearts who are not with us anymore, who decided they are very purposely not going to be with us. My guess is besides even those individuals, you probably thought about empty seats that you know of in these pews, where people used to be, or where people sometimes are and sometimes aren't. And as we think about all those things, there's a lot of different places we go. My guess is some of you were really surprised, maybe even shocked, to hear some of the things that Russ shared this morning. Probably others were disappointed. I fear maybe some of us might be tempted to sort of shrug our shoulders, think, well, it happens. I hope not. But it does happen. And it's important that we have family meetings like we did this morning. There's someone who will visit from time to time. They were here, and I kind of asked, I was like, what did you think about this morning? He was like, that was kind of different than what the lessons are usually like. And we talked about how it was kind of less of a sermon and more of a family talk. And that's what it was. We need those. Especially, you remember what Russ said at the end? How we need to be made sober. To think about what can happen in our faith. It's not just something that he said or just the elders here think. Look what Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 12 says. Hebrews 3 and verse 12. It says, take care, brethren, that there not be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But encourage one another daily, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will become hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For if we have become partakers of Christ, if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end, while it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me. Do you hear this exhortation? Be careful. Pay attention. We're not done yet. We barely even got started. And we've got to put in some real effort to sing those songs of heaven, to remember the God that we serve, to keep on desiring him above everything, or some bad stuff can happen to us. And we know this, and the Hebrew writer supports his premise, his appeal to us in the following verses. He says in verse 16, for who provoked him when they had heard? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest? But to those who were disobedient. So we see they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. Here in the Hebrew writer's exhortation for us to hold fast to the faith of the gospel, he based that appeal going all the way back to people who had heard good news of salvation from a prophet who came among them, a deliverer, who led them through the sea. They were baptized in him and in the sea. And they found salvation, but then they fell away in the wilderness on their journey. And in many ways, what we experience in our lives is very similar to what the children of Israel experienced while they were in the wilderness. Now, this is super scary. That you notice how negative all these things are? Which of them did God swore? You notice how rare that is for God to swear? He does it, but it's not all the time he swears. He swore that they would not enter his rest. That's how serious God was at saying, you're not getting in. Who was it with whom God was angry? Those who sinned. This is a very negative passage about the danger of unbelief. What I'd like to do this evening is look at a story within that story of someone who was faithful to God and someone who didn't get swept away in the tides of discouragement and unbelief. Turn with me to Numbers chapter 13. And I'd like us to take some time to consider the life of Caleb. Numbers chapter 13. It's going to be a pretty straightforward lesson. We're going to just try to go through the story of Caleb's life and try to pick up some lessons for our lives along the way. First, let's try to get into Caleb's life. Caleb was born in North Africa as a slave. He would have worked his whole life out in fields making bricks to build up monuments not for his people, but for his oppressors. Caleb would have watched as friends and family members were mistreated, looked down upon, hated, feared. He would have known of dozens, if not more, of his friends who would have lost their children whenever the Egyptians, their owners, the people who oppressed them, committed an infanticide of an entire generation. Now, Caleb was born not very long after, right around the same time, but there was a man in the Egyptian palace who was from Caleb's people, the Jews. It would have been not long before Caleb was born that Moses perhaps thought he was going to deliver his people by executing vengeance, but eventually just got chased away into the wilderness. And so Caleb lived among a people who, the end of Exodus chapter 2 says that they groaned in their slavery and they cried out to the Lord. And they didn't know it, but God heard their cry. And He saw their trouble. And He remembered His covenant with their forefathers. And He knew. When Caleb would have been in his late 30s, this man Moses returned. He came back and he told the people that God had promised that they would be delivered. And while many people doubted, they were actually delivered. The oppressors, the Egyptians, were swept away. Caleb would have been there in that march. He would have been asking his neighbors, hey, give me your stuff, as they left Egypt. And the Egyptians would have thrown their treasures at Caleb and his family and all his friends as they had their victory parade from slavery to freedom. He would have been there whenever all the people cried out, whenever they thought all hope was lost at the Red Sea. He was a part of that group who was baptized in the sea as they marched through on dry land. And he would have turned around and seen the mightiest army of human history at that point swept away by the mighty hand of God. And he would have sung the song of Moses and Miriam after they crossed the sea. That the Lord has bared His mighty arm. The Lord has redeemed His people from evil. And then they come right to the edge of the promised land. Things were a little rocky at different times, but over the year plus that it took them to get to the land of Canaan, Caleb was there through it all. And I imagine it must have been incredibly exciting. After all, Caleb would have heard his dad and his granddad talking about the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He would have seen the disappointment in so many people's eyes whenever they doubted that the Lord would come through. But now to think that he was about to be a part of the fulfillment of the great covenant for centuries upon centuries in the making. And here Caleb was, a part of it. And how much greater it must have been whenever, right before they entered the promised land, God sent word by Moses that there were to be leaders chosen from every tribe of Israel to go out and to spy out the land. Look at what Numbers chapter 13 says. Numbers 13 and verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send out for yourself men, so that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their father's tribes, every one a leader among them. So Moses did this, and you see in verses 4 through 16, there's a listing of all the men from each and every tribe who were chosen. And they all went into the land. In verse 17, Moses instructs them on what they're supposed to do to see, are there a lot of people? Are there just a few people? Is the land great? Is it not? What can we find there? Bring us back some of the fruit so we can show it to the people, and so on. And in verse 21, it details how they went through all the different areas. And in verse 23, it says, then they came down to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. Anybody got any of those in their fridge? A single cluster of grapes. You know what I'm talking about, right? You grab it like this, eat it like that, right? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Keep going, though. These were not your ordinary grapes. They carried it on a pole between two men with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because the cluster which the sons of Israel cut down from there. This fruit was supposed to represent this land is even more than what we thought before. It's everything we could have ever dreamed of. And you can imagine the excitement of Caleb as they're all coming back after 40 days, being out there in the wilderness, trying to be covert operatives, checking out what's going on, seeing what the people are like, seeing what the land is like. And now you're back and you're sharing stories. And you're hearing about the other parts of the land that the other leaders spied out while they were there. In verse 25, they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days. And they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Before we get into their report, I want to make one observation that I think is really important. So here's the big spoiler. Caleb is a man of tremendous faith, even through a lot of difficulties. And I think there's an important lesson. You see throughout this chapter, there's emphasis made on the idea that Israel is in the wilderness. As a matter of fact, the book of Numbers, which was the title of this book in English, the original title for this book was actually In the Wilderness. That was this period. They were in the wilderness. And I think there's an important principle we can learn. We see Caleb, a man of great faith, even though he had been a slave. And no doubt many people around him thought God had totally forgotten about him. He had been through so much already in his life. And yet he's a man that we're going to see in a second has a deep faith in God. And he's super strong and super resolved in his commitment and his belief in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I think there's an important principle that we can learn from that. It's that oftentimes faith grows best in the wilderness. Oftentimes faith grows best in the wilderness. Being in the wilderness would not be fun. Well, this wasn't a wilderness like the woods. That's what we think about when we think of the wilderness, right? We think about like Alaska or Colorado or someplace like that. And you think, oh, that wouldn't be so bad. It'd be kind of beautiful and there'd be, trees and fruit and stuff like that. And Israel may have seen some of those things, but actually most of the stories of Israel going through the wilderness, maybe a better word for us would be desert. I mean, they're always complaining about there's no water, there's no food, we don't have any shelter, we're all in trouble out of here. All right, so a second ago you were thinking, okay, Alaska, Colorado, I don't love roughing it, but it could be worse. I can handle that. Why don't you think about West Texas? Would you want to live that life? No air conditioning, by the way. They didn't have any AC in the wilderness back there. Arizona, or even worse, think about places like in the Middle East or where it's really hot and really dusty all the time. Now, you might think that somebody might think, man, God is really not knowing what he's doing, leading us through the wilderness out here, through this desert. This is hard. And yet, it appears to me that Caleb's faith was not weakened by his wilderness experience, but actually it was bolstered. Because oftentimes, faith grows best in the wilderness. And we go through times in our lives where things are really difficult and really uncomfortable and really barren. And those times are hard, to be sure. And I'm not trying to downplay those or make you like, it's okay, don't worry about it. But in a very real sense, maybe the times in our lives when we feel like we're in a wilderness, when we're lonely, when people let us down, after our own failures, after other people's failures, those times can be the greatest times of growth in our lives. There's a line in Jeremiah 31, in verse 2. It says, the people who had found the sword will find grace in the wilderness. A lot of you know Jeremiah 31 because the end of that chapter goes on to talk about the covenant that God would make with his people, where I'll be their God and they'll be my people. I'll put their law in their heart. But the beginning of that chapter is that the people who suffered under the sword will find grace in the wilderness. The Apostle Peter wrote to people who would have felt like they were in a wilderness. They were scattered all throughout the world. They weren't close to other Christians. They were suffering. They were rejected. They were abused. It was hard. And yet he says, we rejoice in our various trials. Because we know that our trials purify our faith to make it like precious gold. Because oftentimes, faith grows best in the wilderness. So if you're going through a wilderness, if you go through times where you feel like everything's hard and everything's confusing and I don't know how to deal with this, don't despair. Maybe your faith can grow the best in that place and in that time. And some of you know what happens next in the story. Caleb comes back with the spies, and all the spies report, yes, it's an amazing land. It's perfect. It's better than we had ever imagined or could have ever hoped for. There's no way we can take it. The people there have been eating good for years. They're giants. We look like little grasshoppers they're just going to stomp on whenever we get there, and we have no chance whatsoever. But then look at verse 30. You can imagine, what if that happened? So, by the way, let's put this in context. Imagine this morning, Russ's sermon had gone something like this. The elders met yesterday for several hours to discuss the gospel and really what we're about. And we've come to the conclusion that the death of Jesus, in all likelihood, is not a historical reality. And because of that, obviously the resurrection and everything else is not true. It's a nice story, and if you want to buy into it, then that's wonderful. But we will no longer in this church be upholding the idea of the historical reality of the death and the resurrection, and therefore the rule of Jesus Christ. They didn't say that, by the way, if you weren't here this morning. But if they had, what would the reaction be? Can you imagine everybody starting to nudge each other and go, what's he talking about? Did he just say what I think he said? And all of a sudden, then afterwards, people will be talking and all that kind of thing. What would you do in that setting? If people rejected everything that you thought was true and real and good, look at what Caleb does in verse 30. As all the people are starting up into an uproar, it says, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses, and he said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone in, spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. And then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried. And the people wept that night. And all the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron and the whole congregation and said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plundered. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. I want you to imagine being there. You're Caleb. You really believe in this thing. I mean, you're the one who got everybody quiet. By the way, that was no small thing. Surely all the Israelites were not assembled at this exact, probably the heads of the tribes, maybe a great number of the people. I mean, there were millions of people in Israel at this point, right? And so here, he's the one that got everybody quiet, but now it's running off the rails. Everybody's giving up hope. I mean, people are starting a mutiny. They're abandoning ship. They're going back to Egypt, to slavery. We just got out of there, and they're going to go back. So verse 6 says, then Caleb cried, and he lost all hope, and he never did anything for the Lord again. Is that what yours says? Look what verse 6 says. Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out, is an exceedingly good land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. And do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. What a great speech, right? And I don't know. I don't know the way the text reads. I'm not sure if it means that they stood up and they announced it like a sermon. Or if it was more like they're going around to people saying, no, don't think like this. If they're going from tent to tent and groups of people are huddled around fires. I don't know what it was. But what an inspiring speech. Like, we got this, y'all. It's exactly what we wanted. Those people, they're going to be our prey. God's removed their protection. They have no chance. This is great stuff. But look at what verse 10 says about how the people responded. But all the congregation said to stone them. These are their brothers. These are guys who put their lives on the line to be spies in Canaan. And the people said, let's stone them to death. And the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. God then goes on to have a conversation with Moses, and the end result of it is that, hey, nobody's getting in. Nobody's getting in. If you're 20 years older, basically if you're a legal adult in Israel, you're not getting in. Only this next generation will. Except, look at what he goes on to say in verse 24. He says, but my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. God knows that Caleb was not like everybody else. He didn't give up like everybody else. Here's a second principle that we need to learn from the story of Caleb whenever we go through difficult times. Not only do we need to realize that, hey, when you're in the wilderness, that's okay, because oftentimes faith grows best in the wilderness. The second lesson we need to learn is that we cannot let the failures of others overshadow the faithfulness of God. We cannot let the failures of others overshadow the faithfulness of God. It's really easy for us to be crushed whenever people around us give up and they disappoint us. But you can't let the failures of others overshadow the faithfulness of God. Do you hear that in their speech, Caleb and Joshua's speech to the people? They say, God, if God's pleased with us, he will give it to us. Well, why could it? Well, he promised he would. That's why. He told Abraham and Isaac and Jacob that he would. And he already delivered us out of slavery. And he already brought us this far. Why would we doubt him now? He's given us bread from heaven. And he defeated armies. I mean, Moses just held up a stick one time and we won a battle. You're telling me we can't win otherwise? He really, really believed in the faithfulness of God. No matter the failures of other people. He didn't let other people's discouraging words or their anger and hatred. I mean, that's pretty bad hate to try to kill someone. He didn't let the failures of others turn his gaze away from the faithfulness of God. This is so important. Because this is real stuff that we face. This hit home for me when I was, I guess, 19 or 20. I don't really remember. But it would have been almost exactly this week. It would have been maybe, I guess, last week. I was working at a youth camp. And one of my friends came up to me. And she said, Tim and Marcia are getting a divorce. Now the reason that was important to me was Tim was our preacher where I grew up. And Marcia was his wife. And I was just like, what? Besides that, I actually worked at a restaurant that Marcia got me the job. It's a good friend of hers named Sandra, who owned this restaurant, and I worked there. This little country place. It's called the Snack Shack. So I'm from Alabama, remember? So that's kind of the deal there. And so there we are, and I was just like blown away. I was like, oh, I can't believe this. What happened? And then she said, Marcia had an affair with Sandra. And I heard it, and I thought, I heard that wrong. And I said, you mean Tim? She said, no. Marcia had an affair with Sandra, my preacher's wife. That lady who owned the restaurant, who I worked for, and served them meals. Little did I know what was going on. You want to talk about a failure of other people. It's actually been going on for years, and behind the scenes, Tim had been trying to talk Marcia into really believing the gospel. She lost all faith in the Lord. It wasn't just that she was being immoral. I mean, she didn't believe in the gospel. She didn't believe in the Bible. If you want to hear her story, by the way, you can go on, what's that NPR thing? StoryCorps, is that what it's called? So she and Sandra did one of those. What do you do when something like that happens? What do? How do you handle that? Whenever people that you look up to and you think are just the best, and they're kind of a model for how you're going to live your life, or they're people who are your close friends, and you trust them, or you have trusted them, gone. Just like that. I know what Tim did. He kept loving his wife. And he did his best to try to bring her back. And he didn't let her failure tear his faith down. I know a lot of other Christians who, even though this person who they had looked at as their absolute role model, they said, you know what, I've got another role model who I'm really trusting in. And they didn't let it get them. But I will say this, there were others who got totally messed up. And it just like took their gaze away. And some said, you know what, forget it. Forget it. And others didn't give up, but it really damaged them deeply to think, this person, and what about me? Does that mean that something's wrong with me? I mean, I didn't think anything was wrong with that person. Does that mean something's wrong with me? Listen, y'all, we got to learn the lesson of Caleb. Do not let the failures of others overrule or distract you or turn your eyes away from the faithfulness of God.
Amen.
Interlude. We don't hear much about Caleb for the next couple of decades. He pops up periodically whenever God reminds him of the promises, but he's not a prominent figure. Joshua is. Can I make a side note, by the way? We give Joshua a lot of credit for Israel's journey into the promised land. But don't forget who spoke first. It was Caleb. If I had been Caleb, by the way, what happens next is Moses tells Israel, God says you don't get to go in the promised land because you didn't trust him. And then they say, actually, we'll go. We're ready now. It's okay. We'll go. And then Moses says, no, don't go. Because if you go now, you'll be defeated. No, it's fine. We'll go. We'll go in the land the Lord wants. They were defeated. They were totally crushed because they rebelled against the Lord. And they spent the next 40 years just wandering through the wilderness as punishment for their rebellious, stubborn attitudes. What would you have done if you were Caleb? At this point, God's locked you in. You got your spot. You're in the promised land. Even up until this time, the text in Numbers 14 in one place says that Israel had already 10 times tested the Lord. Some have noted that perhaps this may be just a hyperbolic way of describing it, or actually there are some ways to look at that and see 10 events where Israel had tested the Lord up to this point. Either way you go, they were not good people, even up until now, and it really just gets worse. The following chapters in Numbers talk about mutinies and selfish people and arrogant people, and even Moses himself fails. You know what I think a temptation would have been if you were Caleb? Say, you know what? I'll see you guys in 40 years. We're meeting back here? Okay. And just leave. Right? Because it would be frustrating to be around these kinds of people for 40 years. And yet there's no indication that Caleb does that. He stays with his brethren through all of these difficulties, all these trials, all of their bad behaviors and bad attitudes and all that sort of thing. I think that teaches us a third principle. When we're in the wilderness, when people around us are failing, God's people must not give up on their devotion to each other, especially when we're in trouble. The book of 1 Peter, which we referenced earlier, is a book written to people who are kind of in a wilderness, in a difficult time. And there are at least 3 places in 1 Peter where special attention is given to our relationships with each other. In chapter 1, he says, since you have purified your souls for a sincere love for the brethren, love one another fervently. Do you think about that? That God has purified our souls. And that text says that the reason, 1 Peter 1 verse 22 says, the reason God has purified us is that we would love the brethren. And so we should do it fervently. In 1 Peter chapter 3, there's a very famous text that talks about who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good, indicating that there were people trying to harm Christians. And yet in the paragraph just before that, he says, finally, all of you must be sympathetic, humble in mind, brotherly, tender-hearted, not returning reviling for reviling or insult for insult, but giving a blessing. Whenever you're in trouble and the world around you, and you're under attack, make sure to treat each other right. In chapter 4 and verse 7, He says, the end of all things is near. Be sober for the purpose of prayer. Love one another fervently. Be hospitable to one another. Why this attention? Perhaps it's because whenever we go through difficult times, whenever we feel like people have let us down, one response is just to cut and run. Do you feel betrayed ever by your brethren who do things they're not supposed to do? You ever feel so let down? You think, man, I've poured so much time into this. I've tried so hard. I've loved this person. I thought I could count on this person. I thought they were one of us. And now, boom, gone, done. What is this? I can't trust anybody around here. I can't devote myself to anyone around here because, for all I know, they're going to try to stone me one day. Nope. We got to keep on being devoted to each other. And it's a risk, y'all. It is. Us caring for each other, encouraging each other every day, as long as it's called today, showing the love that Christ has commanded us to, being devoted to gospel is a risky proposition, but it's a necessary one. Because God's people must maintain their devotion to each other, especially when things go poorly. Our first lesson, faith grows best in the wilderness. Second lesson, don't let the failures of others overshadow the faithfulness of God. Third lesson, we've got to continue in our devoted love to each other. But turn over to Joshua chapter 14. Let me show you another couple lessons. Joshua chapter 14. We flash forward now to the time they're actually in the land. They've fought some battles at this point. They've begun to take over Canaan. Joshua has been installed as the head of Israel. He took Moses' spot. And great things are happening. I mean, all of God's promises are coming true. Matter of fact, the end of the book of Joshua would say that not one of God's good promises had not been fulfilled. This was a great time. And as Moses began to portion out the land to the different tribes of Israel, they kind of did a general smash of all the enemies. And then they divided up to the tribes. Said, okay, you go finish the job now. All the tribes have some responsibilities. And as Joshua began to do that, old Caleb came back around. I wonder sometimes, did Joshua and Caleb go out just for walks in the mountains? They go out and get coffee and stuff and talk about how things were going. I don't know. I kind of like to think that no, they're both too busy doing the kinds of stuff they needed to do to get all these kids ready to go for battle. Because remember, they were the only two old guys. Everybody else was kids. So Caleb comes around in Joshua chapter 14. And he reminds Joshua of the land that he was due to inherit. Verse 6 says, Then the sons of Judah drew near to Joshua in Gilgal. And Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said to him, You know the word of the Lord, that he spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. And I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear. But I followed the Lord my God fully. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot is trodden will be an inheritance to you and your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God fully. Now behold, the Lord has let me live, just as he spoke, these 45 years, from the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I'm 85 years old today. I'm still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war and for going out and coming in. Now then, give me this mountain, about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out, as the Lord has spoken. This is in my top 10 for coolest conversations in the Bible, I think. Should have tried to get an 85-year-old to read this, but I don't know who we could have gotten to do that. Isn't it great to think of Caleb going up to Joshua and saying, give me my land. But he didn't say, I know God promised I'd get the land that I spied out, but actually I was wondering, could we find a nice oceanside valley? I know we kind of get the Mediterranean, and I love the ocean. The fish is great. And it's easier, like my knees. So we just have the flat land, that'd be great. And there's not that many people out there anyway. We wipe most of them out. That's not what he wants. Caleb says, give me that mountain country. Mountain country is hard stuff, I guess. I haven't fought too many wars ever, but I would imagine that's hard stuff, especially when you're carrying around swords and clubs and bows and arrows and whatnot, because they got the strategic advantage up there, right? Caleb said, nah, it's okay. Give me that mountain country. And I love his reason. Do you notice in the text? He said, I want that mountain. So I hear there's giants up there. He wants them. He says, come on, I want the giants. And he totally believes that God's going to take him through. That he's going to get his mountain country. That he's going to be able to look over all that land that in his heart he knew way back when that God would give him. And there's a great lesson for us here. The people of faith are always ready and maybe even looking for new challenges in their service to the Lord. I would reckon after 45 years of losing. Think about it, for Caleb, everybody he knew, right? Every cousin he had, every best friend he grew up with, everybody, they all died out there in the wilderness. And he was looking around, there was nobody left. And I imagine that dealing with all these whippersnappers who didn't know how to do anything, that would be hard, being the old guy, having to tell everybody what to do, how to do it, when to do it, all that kind of stuff. And you would think he'd just want to, let's take it easy. It's not Caleb. Give me that mountain. Let's go get us some giants. And I love that. That's the kind of attitude we need to have in our service to the Lord. You see it all throughout Scripture, right? One I think about is the Apostle Paul. You would think Paul would be like, I've kind of hit all the Mediterranean region, planted a bunch of churches, a bunch of people are saved because I preach the gospel. We're good. But then you read the end of the book of Romans, and Paul was getting told, or would be getting told very soon, and certainly he must have had some inkling, that he was probably about to go to prison. And yet he says at the end of Romans, hey guys, y'all get ready, because I want to come see you guys. And then my hope is, I'm headed to Spain, baby. I don't know what's going on out there, but we need to preach the gospel to those folks. What challenges are you pursuing? Are you ready for? Do we run away from them? Do we want to take the easy way out? Or are we ready to go to the mountain country? Are we ready to take on the giants? To face the challenges that the Lord has placed before us? Caleb knew what God had done. Caleb knew who his God was. So he was always ready for whatever the next challenge was. Let me tell you another lesson, though. We're not going to read this, but in Joshua 15 and in Judges chapter 1 is the last story we have about Caleb's life. And it's actually not about some great battle that Caleb won. Which, man, wouldn't it be great to hear about Caleb's battles against the 3 sons of Anak and how he crushed all the giants and tore down their fort? That'd be awesome. But anyways, after he did a lot of his battles, there's an interesting bit where Caleb sends out word and says, hey, whoever's willing to take, and he designated some particular land in his territory, says, whoever is willing to go up and fight and take that land, I'll give them my daughter as a wife. Which is a big deal, right? You'll be a part of my family. Caleb, the goat of Israel, the best of all time. You'll be in my family. Right? Why did Caleb do that? Was he tired? Was he done? Was he like, I can't. I'm just, you know what? 3 sons of Anak is 3 too many. That's all. I got my mountain house and done. I don't think so. That doesn't sound like Caleb. You know what I think it was? I think Caleb knew that today's battles are the time to train tomorrow's warriors. Today's battles are the time to train tomorrow's warriors. The one who answers the call was a man named Othniel, who some of you know was the very first person who delivered Israel after this generation, after Caleb and Joshua died out, and after the people who were with them died out. Othniel was the first person who rescued Israel from oppressors. Well, where did that start? Where it started with an old man saying, hey, who's ready to go to war? Are you thinking about that, old people? Y'all doing that for the rest of us? We need you. We need you to be okay with being old. Old is good in the Bible, remember? It's not in our world. We're not in our world. We're in God's world. What are you doing to include people in the war? When you are going through different questions of faith, are you sitting down and studying those? Not just with people who know a lot of stuff, but with even people who don't. Are you talking with your kids about struggles that are in the world and with faith, and even like things that Russ talked about this morning? Are you having those conversations? Because today's battles are the time to prepare tomorrow's warriors. And the truth was, Othniel wasn't just tomorrow's warrior. What you're doing is you're making Othniel a warrior today. And that's what we need. We need more warriors today in the battles against sin and temptation and doubt and frustration and evil and all those things. We need those who've been on the path to raise up new warriors, more people to fight the battles. And Caleb knew that. He knew that today's battles are the time to train tomorrow's warriors. All right, quick recap before our last lesson that we learned from the life of Caleb. Number one, oftentimes faith grows best in the wilderness. Number two, don't let the failures of other people overshadow the faithfulness of God. Number three, God's people must maintain their devotion to each other, even and perhaps especially when things are difficult in the world around us. Number four, people of faith are always ready and even looking for the mountains and giants, the new challenges in service to God. Number five, what we just talked about. Today's battles are the time to train tomorrow's warriors. Look back in Joshua 14. What was it that was so special about Caleb? Really? Was it that he was just too brave to ever back down? Was it that he was loud and could get everybody quiet? Was it that he was old? Those aren't the things, actually. Look at what it says in chapter 14, back in verse 8. He says, "My brethren who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear." Flash back to where we started, Hebrews 3. People's hearts melt with fear. People give in to unbelief and doubt and all those things. Caleb says that was them. And for us, we don't want to be a part of that. That's what the Hebrew writer says. Be careful. Take care that you don't do that. Then look what Caleb says was different about him. And may God help us that it would be true of us. He said, "But I followed Jehovah my God fully." That's the quote. There's 4 times in the books of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua where it's said of Caleb that he followed the Lord fully. That's actually what God said about it. Back in Numbers 14, verse 24. He said Caleb had a different spirit. What was different? Caleb followed me fully. That's what was different. If we're really going to be people of faith, people who stay committed to God, then we have to be people who follow the Lord fully. 3 things I see there. Number 1, we follow. That means I can't be so arrogant to think that I know what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. I've got to be willing to be a follower. Number 2, he followed the Lord. He didn't follow Israel. Otherwise, he would have gone right along with the other spies. Said, "Oh, yeah, probably too hard. He didn't follow his family, what everybody else thought or did or said. And he didn't even follow Moses, who was a great man, but he wasn't the Lord. Caleb followed the Lord. Who are you following? Who are you listening to? Who do you trust? Who do you look up to? The one person we can truly count on is the Lord. Caleb must have learned that in the greatest of ways. Every person he ever looked up to, that he ever admired, that he ever could have trusted, died in that wilderness. And if he hadn't learned it earlier, he would have learned it later. That the Lord was the only one he could follow if he wanted to enjoy anything in his life. Caleb shows us you need to learn that lesson early. To follow the Lord. That last bit says he followed the Lord fully. I'm sure Caleb messed up at some point in his life. There's no story about it. Probably that's on purpose. Because God wants us to see some pictures of people like Caleb. That it's possible. Sometimes we like to think like, oh, it can't be done. We're all going to mess up in big ways. Caleb followed the Lord fully. So can we. Although there is only one other person in the Bible that this is said of. 1 Kings chapter 11, it said that David followed the Lord fully. Then again, I guess God didn't have to say it quite that way because we saw someone long after all these stories happened who followed the Lord faithfully. He was faithful, not quite like Moses, who was in God's house and who was pretty faithful, but not all the way. But he was faithful as a son. And now he's with the Lord, who he followed fully. And he gave us an example. He went out in the wilderness and trusted God even more. He didn't let the failures of a bunch of dummies around him all the time overshadow his belief in the faithfulness of his Father. He loved the people with him. He loved them even to the end. When he came to the end of his life, he picked up his cross and he walked up the mountain to slay the greatest giants human history had ever known. And he calls us to follow in his steps, to take part in his great war against sin and death and evil. He calls us to follow him fully. Let's stand and sing.
Dome some, the earth and the ocean and water and the sea is the grace of the Savior for sinners like me. Sent from the Father, and it thrills my soul just to feel and to know that His blood makes me whole. His grace reaches me, yes, His grace reaches me, and will last through eternity. Now I'm under His control, and I'm happy in my soul. Just to know that His grace reaches me. Higher than the mountains and brighter than the sun, it was offered on Calvary for everyone. Greatest of treasures, and it's mine today. Though my sins were as scarlet, He has washed them away. His grace reaches me, yes, His grace reaches me, and will last through eternity. Now I'm under His control, and I'm happy in my soul. Just to know that His grace reaches me.
Well, it's been a good day. So glad each and every one of you are here, to our visitors. We welcome you. We're glad that you took the time to come and worship God with us tonight and encourage us to be encouraged.
It's probably been mentioned 20 times today, but don't leave today. If there's something weighing you down, find somebody, grab an old person, talk to them, let them know what's going on. You have a few minutes before we get to our cars, that if something weighing you down, you really need to tell somebody. Okay, our next meeting times are going to be Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. for another Bible study, and then next Sunday morning at 9 a.m. for Bible study and 10 a.m. for worship. It was mentioned this morning, but it's worth mentioning again for those who didn't hear it. Nigel had a good report. Nigel Rogers, he had a PET scan, and it found that, I want to make sure I'm saying this right, there were no tumors. He's still going to have treatments and everything, but they didn't find any tumors. So that was a great report that we can be thankful for. New news was Lindsay's grandmother, Jean Wolfgang. She had a stroke and is in bad condition, and that, she covers our prayers. So you can also ask the Mass if there's anything else that can be done for her right now. There's in the bulletin, there's the list of everybody else who's sick and in need of help. So please, if you haven't already looked at that, do that and see what you can do this week to help them out. We have good news that we can rejoice in. Gary and Sharon Ellis, is that your daughter? I didn't catch that part. Granddaughter? Okay. Jessica Johnson, Gary and Sharon Elliott's granddaughter, was baptized. So we can rejoice with them in that. And also Melba De La Rosa was baptized Thursday. She's been back. She's been visiting and participating in the Spanish Bible classes and studying with Josh and Lisa Reeves, so we can rejoice that she was baptized too. So she's sitting in the back there. I talked to her after. Group 1 is going to be meeting tonight. So as soon as service is out, if you can go back there, and those meetings will start pretty quick after. Now we'll stand, and the Lord's Supper is in the back. If you exit out and go towards the left, it's in the back, and for those who are not able to partake this morning. So now we'll have our closing prayer to bring our service to a close.
Bow with me, please. Father, we're so thankful for this first day of the week, this opportunity that you have instructed us and reminded us that we need. And Father, it's days like this that we can see the wisdom, understanding the encouragement that we get just from worshiping you, singing praises to you, remembering who you are, remembering your great promises. Father, we pray that we won't forget those promises. We're thankful for the sobering messages of the day. We pray that these messages, even though difficult sometimes to hear, will be a bolstering to our faith, that we will be encouraged by them and know that, again, that you are always faithful, no matter what we do or what anyone else does. We pray that we'll remember that. We'll be encouraged by that. We'll encourage one another. We pray that we will be people that will wholly and fully trust in you and do everything that you command us, Father. For we know that you are the one that we should serve and the one that we should love because you first loved us and we're willing to send your Son. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.